He's enamored with the idea of being a monarch himself. You must entertain for the king, and you must make the king feel good.
He just loves winners.
The minute you have the stench of a loser, whether you're a political ally or not, he will quickly throw you away.
Including in your own house?
Not in the moment, but he'll do it pretty quickly.
Hello and welcome to TrumpWorld with me, Anushka and Matt.
And me, Matt Fry. Now, Anushka, you're joining us on this side of the pond this week because our Trump worlds collide thanks to the state visit.
He's in the UK and so am I. I'm right now sitting in the hotel where the US press corps are gathering ready to cover the next few days. The key question for me on this visit is it worth sucking up to Donald Trump? Does it even work?
Well, that is a question that I think has exercised the mind of every leader around the world for the last 8 months since he's taken over office. And I guess it depends on your personal circumstances. How desperate are you because of tariffs? Are you desperate to win an election? In which case it might be good to stand up to Trump like Marcani or President Lula of Brazil. If you're desperate just to, govern well, then maybe that's where you are with Keir Starmer.
Yeah, I mean, Keir Starmer really has gone all in. I mean, this is the full shebang, the royal visit, gold-plated, the best room in Windsor Castle, all lined up for him. Do you think it's worth doing that?
The sad reality is that the best card that we have to play as a nation with Donald Trump, and perhaps with anyone, frankly, who cares about things like monarchy, are the trappings of monarchy. It is the sleepover at Windsor Castle. It is the royal banquet. It's the golden carriage, all the fanfare. We do that stuff really well. And it's the best example of British soft power. But the problem is that it only gets you so far. And what I worry about is whether Keir Starmer, having played that card when he first visited Trump in February with the very demonstrative envelope theatrically pulled out of his pocket to hand over to the president, the first president to have 2 state visits, not just one. Even Ronald Reagan only had 1 state visit. That there's a sort of myopia there that this doesn't go much further, because once Trump is gone and once he's forgotten about the soft pillows in Windsor Castle, what is there left? Because there are so many areas of disagreement on Gaza, obviously on tariffs, on free speech, where this relationship could sour.
Yeah, which could be quite difficult. I've been talking to people, diplomats and officials about, why did he really need to have this historic invitation, the first president ever to be invited twice to a state visit? And there's kind of the pragmatic answer, that the answer that they're putting out there, which is, look, a state visit is an unbelievable opportunity to get access to the White House. We know this week they've been in there, even with Peter Mandelson, the US ambassador, having been sacked by Keir Starmer because of his associations with Jeffrey Epstein. We know that the team have been in there with the White House, and at the state banquet tonight, there will be all British ministers alongside, as someone put it to me, anyone who's anyone inside the White House. But the other reason for this is actually Britain's economic interests and the government's political interests, which is Keir Starmer's in trouble. And what he needs more than anything, if he's got any chance of turning this around, is for the economy to improve. And they're nervous about what Donald Trump could do because of his nature. He could do something suddenly that massively impacts on our economy. And so they've decided to go all in with the kind of sycophancy, if you like, to try and appeal to him. But, I think there are also risks that go with that relationship, particularly when you consider how close he is to Nigel Farage and how much he likes other strongmen leaders around the world.
And there's also this curious historical aspect to the so-called special relationship. And I really hate using that term because, let's be honest, it's not all that special. And it's, the relationship has been through various mutations. And the challenge, I think, for a British Prime Minister in a relationship that is really not equal, although some of the characters have been equal in the past. I mean, Churchill and Roosevelt were equal characters. They were equal world leaders, but it was Churchill who begged the Americans under Roosevelt to basically save him from Nazi Germany. Tony Blair thought he was equal to an American president when he stood up to Bill Clinton in the Oval Office, a moment described very proudly to me by a former British ambassador, and basically told him to put boots on the ground or the threat of it over the Kosovo crisis. And Clinton listened to Blair and did just that. And then Blair thought, oh, I can take this to the next guy. And he thought he could do the same thing with George W. Bush after 9/11. And I remember all these diplomats in Washington saying, we are the Athens to their Rome. Like the Americans are powerful, but a bit thick, and we can basically steer them in the right direction as the philosopher island. Well, how did that turn out? Because, we keep coming up with movie titles. It was Love Actually, and then it turned into Fatal Attraction for Tony Blair. And I think Starmer's in a similar position. He has to judge it really carefully because he's caught between his own party and his own electorate, who are very, very wary of Trump, positively dislike him. I think 75% of the British probably really don't like him. And the requirements of governance and trade and all these other things where he has to come to some sort of deal. So I think he's got to, yes, hold out the hand of friendship, give him, all the royal paraphernalia you can. He can take home the golden cutlery if he wants, but you've got to have a little bit of pushback. And I wonder if that'll come over issues, especially like Gaza.
It's funny you mentioned Love Actually, because I always think of that scene in the film where the UK Prime Minister in the film turns to the US President and actually stands up to him. And it's a scene in a film because it has literally never happened. And what people always say
we're
is,
always looking for it, aren't we? We're always hoping
but when you go into Downing Street, you're basically, I always get this impression you're taken into a dark room. They basically open up the books and you realize how important that relationship is in ways that, we never get to see close up. And therefore you can never do the thing that means you've got to stand up to him. That said, I do think there are examples recently where it doesn't necessarily work to be this sycophantic towards Donald Trump. He sees it as an opportunity to sort of show strength over you. And at the moment, it may have worked so far, but there are a couple of quite big tension points I can see coming down the track to do with, the taxes that we put on major tech companies that are based on the US. Or the other big thing is the relationship that's been growing between India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Putin and Xi Jinping. Some people think Trump is pushing Modi in that direction with huge tariffs on India. We, the UK, but also the whole of the European countries are now under massive pressure to go with America and actually put pressure on India and China as well. I think that could become really, really difficult.
I spoke to a couple of Labour MPs over the weekend, and they said to me, if only our Prime Minister, the leader of our party, Keir Starmer, Sir Keir Starmer, and Trump does love a title, if he could just stand up to Trump in front of that fireplace, because we want love actually, not actually love. And the danger is we're going to get the latter, not the former. But imagine for Keir Starmer, this could be one of those defining moments. It might only last a week or so, and there might be hell to pay at the end of it. But I just think that, especially now, with all the mood music and all the kind of political temperature being set by Nigel Farage, and to some extent the kind of, the hard left that has got disgruntled with Keir Starmer over Gaza, this would be his opportunity. But my God, he would have to pay a price for it. Trump would not forgive him lightly.
And it is quite a chilling moment as well, as we speak, as well as this sort of economic side of it, which I totally buy. Like, America can do one tiny thing and completely impact all of our economies instantly in a way that would be politically, apocalyptic for the Labour Party if they're not already in that state right now. So what does Keir Starmer do in that situation? We can understand why he's doing it, but we have another chilling thing happening right now. And, I've just been to Utah to report on the Charlie Kirk killing, and, things are getting increasingly heated. The Americans are increasingly attacking Europe for what it sees as an attack on free speech. And I think things could go in quite a scary direction when it comes to that, in terms of the divisions we're seeing here. But actually, I always knew America was divided, but until I started living there, I don't think I felt the level of it. It's like nothing I've ever experienced before.
It's this collective idea that collectively one half of America wanted to kill Charlie Kirk, who is, now a political saint for the right, and the other half have to somehow exact their revenge. When you combine that with the very open vengefulness of the Trump presidency, when you combine that with the powers vested in ICE, lifting people off the streets wearing masks, when you combine that with this kind of more theatrical element of the National Guard being deployed, I mean, my American friends even those with the thickest of hides who've seen, political violence come and go. And this can be a politically very violent country after all. Even in the 90s, there was political violence. Waco, Oklahoma, Columbine, the first school shooting. But even those friends have told me in recent days, we're really scared. Not civil war scared, but a kind of complete fraying of the texture, of the fiber that at the end of the day binds the country together. And whenever I felt really depressed about America, which was quite a lot when I was there during the post 9/11 years, I would go to a naturalization ceremony where you have new immigrants swearing allegiance not to a president, not to a country, but to a piece of paper, to the Constitution that defends their rights to be different, but to be American at the same time. And I think that contract with citizens, with America, has gone.
When we were trying to look at political violence in recent years in America, which has certainly been there, it has so clearly been there in both directions. I mean, we've seen, Democratic politician and her husband murdered in Minnesota. We've seen an arson attack at the home of the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania. We, of course, saw the terrible attack against Nancy Pelosi's husband. And before that, there were Republicans who were shot as well. These attacks have been happening in both directions. And I think the challenge for a lot of people right now is, how do we move away from this to more unity?
But Anushka, we've never before had an administration by decree saying that if you somehow made light of Charlie Kirk's death, or if you somehow celebrated Charlie Kirk's death, woe to those who did. But if you did that, and if it can be proven, you will lose your job. We will make sure that you're fired, that your livelihood is gone. I mean, how does that gel with their idea of pure free speech? It doesn't, frankly. And I think, again, there is violence on both sides, against both sides. But to have the administration from the get-go, the minute that poor man was killed, say, I blame the left, I blame the Democrats, and for Trump to not put a lid on that, I think that is where we're in different territory now.
And all of that is obviously going to hang over this state visit, not just the debate that's being happening in the US over Charlie Kirk, but also the debate that's been happening here, where we saw that huge far-right march over the weekend. I think it's going to amplify the political differences between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump. And we know, for example, that Keir Starmer and many of his aides are about to attend a big progressive conference here in the UK. It'll be interesting to see how the president responds to that. It will be interesting to see how the president responds to Keir Starmer's difficult political moment right now. It may make everything we're about to talk about, whether you should be sycophantic or whether you should stand up to Donald Trump, even harder to negotiate for the UK.
Indeed. Well, let's introduce our guest. So now, to explore the key question, whether to stand up to Trump or to stand by him, let's speak to Chuck Todd, a man with decades of experience covering US politics. He was the chief political analyst at NBC and the host of Meet the Press, and GQ once called him the most powerful journalist in Washington, D.C. Welcome to you, Chuck.
It's nice to see you, Matt.
So the subject at hand is whether to stand by or to stand up to Donald Trump. If you were a world leader, surely you'd be standing by him, or let's put it this way, you'd be sucking up to him.
Everything depends on your own situation, right? Look, I look at this from, there's a children's book called If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. And some people may be familiar with it, some may not, but the idea is if you give a mouse a cookie, they're going to keep coming back for more, right? That's essentially the moral of the story. And it's a children's book. And there is a lot to be seen, and I think that's what you have to weigh, right? You have to weigh, how long do you think you're dealing with him? And I think world leaders look at this and maybe appeasement or sucking up to him makes more sense than if you do it domestically, right? Because domestically, what we've seen is every time he has come for a pound of flesh, he's gotten it, he comes back for more, right? Whether it's with the media companies, with the tech companies, even in some of these trade deals. So I don't think you can sit here and say that anybody has figured this out, but it really ultimately, I think you cannot look at it in terms of I think you have to look at it in terms of your own needs in the moment.
So Lula's running for a re-election. It pays for him to stand up to Trump.
It's good politics for him
Right.
domestically.
And Starmer hasn't got election for another 4 years or so, and it pays for him, arguably, to be nice to Trump.
Oh, I think so, especially in the situation he's in right now, which is he's kind of politically weak. He's got, they've got the embarrassment of the ambassador having to be fired and recalled, essentially. So he's in a different situation, and he's also got his European allies to worry about. And you've got the U.S. Presence with NATO, and you've got, a European conflict, right? So, it is to me understandable why many of the European allies are doing what they're doing this time, because at the end of the day, they know he could really mess up NATO, and that's the last thing they want.
Yeah, but on your argument, on what you're saying, to some extent, isn't it quite risky what they're doing? Because, the mouse does keep coming back for the cookie. And there is this kind of idea that Donald Trump loves the idea of a strong man. And if someone's sucking up to him, he knows he can kick them around.
That's been my experience and my observation. I mean, I look at, and that's why the perfect way to deal with him is to find a few places where you do stand up, and you find a few places where you go ahead and give him something, where you at least let him know that, hey, I'm not going to be an easy mark. I think the world leader that has managed him better than anybody else so far is Claudia Sheinbaum out of Mexico. And I never would have expected that, to be honest, but she stands up to him every once in a while. She but at the same time, she'll give him a little something for cooperation with the border. Maybe she'll ramp up tougher. And AMLO did the same thing, her predecessor down there. So he's transactional. So if you come to him with something you need or you want, or you stand up for him and you give him something over here, you can create a give and take. I think the mistake that's made is when it's all appeasement.
And arguably, it looks publicly like it's all appeasement, if that's the word you would use with Keir Starmer. I mean, some people cringed when he handed over that letter from the king, to Donald Trump. But arguably, we have had some trade advantages. I was just talking to someone about the tens of thousands of jobs in the car industry here that rely on us having reduced tariffs in cars. They were talking about this balance you were talking about. They insist that behind closed doors, Keir Starmer can be tough. I mean, it really is all the pageantry he could hope for. Yep. It's the royals. It's, gold edged. What is it that makes him love that kind of scene in particular?
Oh, I think he's just enamored with it. He's enamored with the idea of being a monarch himself. I think there are people that think that this is his drive is for authoritarianism, but if you think about it, he is sort of the stereotype of what we think of the sort of narcissistic monarch that both of our television series will mock at different times, right? Which is you must entertain for the king, and you must make the king feel good, and it's good to be the king, right? All of those things. In some ways, that does make him. I just think it makes him feel better for whatever reason or another, and that is his drive for authority is more for the pageantry than it is from some sort of ideological movement. It's why I've always said it isn't like the 1930s in that respect, because it's not like he's got some grand idea or grand plan. He just wants to be liked, and we can all decide whether what happened to him as a child or a teenager or whatever that created this necessity. But it's a strange fact. He doesn't have a lot of personal friends. Like, there aren't people that you can identify. Oh, that's a childhood friend. Oh, that's somebody he's known for 40 years. He doesn't have people in his life like that. There are people he's known for a long time, but there's nobody you say, oh, he's the close friend. In many ways, the friends he has today are kind of new. They're people he wasn't friends with 10 years ago. He didn't know them. So I think that also tells you a little something about him. But look, he's the president. Let me throw an idea out at you guys, and I'm curious. The idea of, now that there is an opening at the embassy in the United States, the UK embassy in the United States, and Starmer has a political foe in Nigel Farage, the most Clintonian thing to do would be you take somebody essentially, who has good relations with the administration. How would that play? How would that work?
Chuck, it's a great idea, except that Nigel Farage has his eyes on a bigger job, and that's the job of the man sitting in number 10 at the moment. So I think once upon a time, in the first Trump administration, he would have probably said, yes, thank you very much, and bitten off the hand that offered that job. I think at the moment, he's got his sights set on number 10. He's parked his tanks on Keir Starmer's lawn. He's rolled all over the Tory lawns. I mean, he at the moment, at least, he's the man. He is the man of that moment.
He wouldn't say yes to it right now, but at the time they were originally considering it, when Peter Mandelson was put in, Nigel was very, very clear that he wanted them to offer him that job. And I actually spoke to people inside Downing Street, and I said, "Isn't there something to that? Like you achieve a couple of things. Yes, there's the good relationship with the administration, but also you move Nigel Farage slightly away. I mean, in some ways, I'll tell you what, Nigel Farage in the first place might have been better for them than Peter Mandelson."
I'm just curious about the point you made about Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico. I mean, she clearly has given some, into some of Trump's demands, especially on the border, but she's also been very firm in her language. The other person that we admired with firmness of language was Mark Carney, who kind of pivoted from using tough language about Trump to get elected as the Prime Minister of Canada, something that no one thought was possible, a few weeks before he started his campaign. And then once he was in that job and he went to see Trump in the Oval Office, he continued with the tough language, but it was much more emollient and more charming. Did his pivot work out, or is Canada suffering?
Well, Canada is suffering economically still, right, from the tariffs. I mean, everybody is suffering right now. And I am extraordinarily pessimistic about world relations, right? When the biggest economy in the world erects nationalist walls like we've done, the most logical response is everybody else to start to look out for themselves first, right? So it becomes a contagion of nationalism. And that said, it was nationalism that essentially Carney tapped into in Canada, right? And that it goes back to, weirdly, Trump respects that. And if he knows that, look, you're standing up because this is what you believe is in the best interest of your country, and then that's how you can create a give and take. What Trump just does not accept is the premise of a multipolar world, right? He doesn't accept the premise of multilateralism. He doesn't, and I don't, and he's never accepted the idea of multilateralism, right? Which is why he criticizes NATO in particular. But it's a lot of these multilateral organizations that he's skeptical of. And it goes back to, hey, we're the United States. We're the biggest power. Why should we share that? Right. And that's because that's his mindset, right? It's a zero-sum game. We're the which is also why he ends up appeasing Xi, right? He is not nearly as tough on Xi as he is on Venezuela, for instance, right? But and arguably they're both adversaries in a way, but he sees Xi as an equal. He sees Putin as an equal. He does not see Zelensky as an equal, and he doesn't see Starmer as an equal.
Can I just quickly ask you on this, on the particular question of equality, because the special relationship, which we go on about much more than you guys do, and I think the last time Trump was here in 2018, he took the mickey out of Theresa May, who was then the prime minister, when he was at Chequers. He said, this is the most special kind of special relationship ever. I mean, he was just telling us what we really wanted to hear, because that relationship is the crack cocaine of British diplomacy. We need it in order to feel relevant. And it's been through various different permutations. Where does America, and especially this administration, see Britain now? Are we your Sancho Panza that goes along with Don Quixote into the sunset? Or are we, the left hoof of the donkey that he sits on? I mean, what do we bring to the relationship for you?
I do believe that we see you as our real European ally versus everybody else. Like Europe, it's sort of like the UK is family and Europe is a friend.
I'm not sure if that's a compliment or a curse.
Especially so for the American right, that relationship.
It has been. And there's always, think about think about our two political parties in this country and how obsessed they are with always helping their counterparts in the UK, right? It is the only other country that comes close in that kind of, where, by the way, where the country itself needs to hear how much we care, is Israel, right? It's the UK and it's Israel, and they're on, and in some ways it's the same thing, and because of that kind of closeness,
So we are special.
we do, right? We also want to get involved more in your politics than we do, for instance, any other country's politics.
But on that point, I mean, in the past, every one of these visits, whether it's to Washington or to London, would have been, lubricated by language about common values and, a little nod to Winston Churchill and to Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher riding their horses together. But, we had Elon Musk, who I know has fallen out with Donald Trump, but is still, politically, spiritually quite close to him, on a massive screen in London, the biggest march we've ever seen by the far right in this city, basically saying violence is coming to you, Britain, whether you like it or not. Charlie Kirk, the late Charlie Kirk, the closest thing that you have to a political saint in American politics right now, certainly on the right, called Britain a totalitarian third world hellhole. This whole debate about free speech or the lack of it in this country, those shared values, certainly between the party of the administration and this country, they don't exist anymore.
I agree with that, in that there is not that same, every other president, it wouldn't have mattered what the ideology was of the prime minister, right? There was a tightness, and I'm not going to sit here and say that look, Clinton and Blair certainly had a better relationship maybe than the relationship that he inherited with John Major and things like that. So I don't want to, but and I do think because they were ideological soulmates, Blair and Clinton, that was close. But look how quickly Bush and Blair became close, right? And now internationally, Bush and Clinton actually share an ideology, and I think that's the issue, right? Which is ultimately Trump's the first American president since World War II who didn't have the same ideology about the world, right? And on sort of the relationship that the United States and Europe are supposed to have with each other, and the UK. He's the first one that didn't accept the premise, right, of this relationship. And I think that's, we're now seeing the fallout from that.
And let me just ask you about that, because obviously Keir Starmer and Donald Trump are ideologically very different. We actually had quite a lot of controversy during the election campaign when Labour Party figures went and, campaigned with the Democrats. I don't know if that will become a bit of a thing here, because there's a big progressive conference about to happen in London, which I'm sure Donald Trump knows about. But when people relay to us the first call between Prime Minister Starmer and then Donald Trump as a candidate, it was like a day or two after the assassination attempt. And somebody who is very familiar with that call said to me, Keir Starmer was like, I'm so sorry about what happened to you. I hope you're okay. And apparently Trump was like, yeah, forget that. You're a winner. You're like a massive winner. Like, your election result is completely incredible. And the person was saying to me, he just loves winners. And so given that, I'm interested in, if that's right, if you think that about Donald Trump, but also Keir Starmer now is in so much political trouble. I mean, people are talking about whether he can survive till the next election after Peter Mandelson had to be sacked as US ambassador. How much will that change how Donald Trump feels about Keir Starmer?
Well, Trump doesn't, in the way that you just described, he loves being seen with winners. The minute you have the stench of a loser, whether you're a political ally or not, he will quickly throw you away. He will quickly distance. And so this is a very dangerous...
Including in your own house?
Including in your own house.
When he's your guest?
Oh, he would, not in the moment, but he'll do it pretty quickly. He gets a sense of that. And this is what... But he's done it to his own political allies in the past, domestically, where the minute, he'll throw... it is all about in service to him. And the minute, he doesn't want to be seen as a loser or weak. And he thinks you're dragging him down in some form or another, or he has an opportunity to strengthen himself. And I promise you, if he thinks he's got an opportunity to get Farage as prime minister, he is going to rhetorically, and in the entire MAGA movement, is going to rhetorically make Starmer's life miserable in the UK. And that's what I would be nervous about if I were Starmer.
And when he was here in 2018 with Theresa May, he did exactly that to her. He undermined her because he talked up Boris Johnson, who had just resigned as foreign secretary over the Brexit agreement that was too soft for his liking. And Trump gave an interview, I think it was to the Times, on the eve of the visit, and he completely undermined it. I remember at the time, officials at Number 10 were tearing their hair out. They were distraught by the fact that this guy, who was already a liability to invite into your house, was then beginning to burn the sofa.
It is funny when you talk to officials here who basically try and like arrange it all so it goes perfectly. And they were so happy about after that White House visit because in their eyes it went perfectly. But they always say, I think right up to Starmer himself, you just have no clue what is going to happen when Donald Trump's around. You don't know. And so they're really nervous. I mean, the one complicating factor here, and maybe it's not for him, but I think it is, an issue, which is Peter Mandelson's demise was all around his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, and in many ways vindicates that the birthday book is real, because Peter Mandelson isn't denying that those pages were really from him. How does Trump handle all of that?
The one thing I've thought about in the sacking of Mandelson over the Epstein issue is whether that Trump will resent that and be angry that by doing it, you're acknowledging that it's a bad thing, and you're acknowledging the existence of the very thing that Trump is trying to deny. So I think that's a wild card. It could very well. Now, that said, because of the current situation that we have with the assassination of Kirk, Trump may be feeling untouchable politically right now, right? And he may be feeling he can, and he's not, maybe he doesn't want to worry, and he may think, well, Epstein's gone, nobody's going to be talking about this anymore, so I don't have to worry about it. But I have thought that it's possible the way Starmer's handled this, that it will irritate Trump.
I mean, the other thing that will come up, especially in a press conference, which they're due to have at Chequers, the Prime Minister's country residence, on Thursday, will be Gaza, won't it? I mean, just today, the UN Commission of Inquiry report says that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. 4 out of the 5 categories for defining genocide, those boxes are ticked by Israel. This is in the run-up to the UK recognizing an independent Palestinian state, as they said they would, and I can't imagine them not doing that at the UN next week. And Trump has already been on the record for saying that is a really bad idea. And I'm sure he's going to disagree violently with this UN Commission report and will side with Israel on that. I mean, that could be a really abrasive issue, don't you think?
It's possible. And it's also possible that Trump uses the moment to send a message to Netanyahu, who he is upset with, at messing up the ceasefire negotiations, right, with Hamas, with the attack on Qatar. And that has become a huge, look, there's a lot of financial relationship. It's interesting. I was with somebody who's very much in the Israeli opposition to Netanyahu, who is very skeptical of the Qataris and whether they can be trusted in any form, one way or the other. So it's that is a very complicating factor in this relationship. So yes, is the United States going to stand by Israel against that UN report? That is true, but I don't think the chances are zero that he doesn't stand next to Starmer and tell Netanyahu that he's got to end this war soon.
The Qataris lavished a jumbo jet on Trump. They spent $60 billion on American arms. I mean, when it comes to sucking up to Trump, they're probably in pole position. They get the gold medal for sucking up to Trump. And yet, we don't know how much he knew about the airstrike, but he allowed that to go ahead. And they were furious about it. It shows you the limitations of flattery, doesn't it?
I think it does. And it's a reminder that, he expects the tributes, but he does not believe he owes anything in return per se. But I think we're not, I don't think we have the full story on how quickly he was informed of this. It's also possible Trump didn't hear what Netanyahu claims he sold him to, right? So I this is one of those, it doesn't make a lot of sense that the United States would look the other way on an attack on Qatar with so much of our American forces in that country's. That's why I don't buy the Israeli pushback on this, and I don't think Bibi has a lot of credibility.
The other thing I didn't understand when the strike happened was, I mean, it's very clear that the warning was not specific at all in terms of who they were going to strike and where they were going to strike. And speaking to people in the military, it is absolutely, unbelievable almost that Israel wouldn't have given that sort of details to the US. Why was he not more openly angry about that?
Well, I think it goes back to that's a question where he's balancing constituencies. This is one of those few issues where there's political. The one reason he sticks so closely with Bibi right now in this is that it divides the American left, right? I mean, it has served him well politically, but he is starting to see members of his own base not necessarily in the same place on this. And you see more and more high-profile members of the MAGA movement questioning the conduct of this war, what's going on in Gaza, not comfortable with everything that's happening. So I do think he's a bit torn on this, and he's finding out what every American president has found out since the mid-90s. Bibi Netanyahu forgets who is the little country in this relationship and who's the big country in this relationship. And he continues to do that. And I think he believes he's politically immune from Trump. And there's going to be a moment where Trump, decides to remind Bibi who's the secondary member of this relationship.
Yeah, although interesting he didn't at that moment, because it felt like the moment.
I hear you, but I think it could be coming, is what I would say. Is that, look, he's not going to. I just think this is, and look what he's doing now, doing a ground war in Gaza. I mean, this is only prolonging the war.
And just on because there's Netanyahu and there's Putin, who are both seen as these strong men who Trump gets on with well. And then we had this sort of spectacle, I would say, of all the European leaders coming with Zelensky to the White House. And I mean, sycophancy central in terms of going around the table, telling Trump how wonderful he was. And just bringing it back to our first question, it kind of, it might be in Keir Starmer's interest to, hand out an invitation from the king in order to try and protect our economy, because if our economy gets in a worse situation, Starmer's really political. His political fortunes are really through the floor. He needs to turn that around. But that sycophancy, yes, the relationship with Zelensky is much better than it was, say, in February. But I mean, we might notice that there isn't peace between Russia and Ukraine. If anything, we've moved further away from peace between Russia and Ukraine since that. I mean, aren't these kind of strongmen leaders taking him for a ride to some extent? And in this situation, the sycophancy didn't work.
I agree. And I look at the first term, right? In Trump 1.0, most people's instincts was to stand up to Trump, right? Internationally and domestically, even in his own party. Right? In Trump 2.0, everybody's decided they're exhausted from that fight, and they've concluded that what they did in the first term didn't work. Let me try this. And what my analysis would be is, no, it did work in the first term. What didn't work is that Biden had a failed presidency, right? Biden, didn't understand why he won in 2020, and he didn't lead the country to a point where they were ready to turn the page on Trump. So, we're here, and in some ways, not standing up to him only, I think, ends up encouraging him to. I mean, again, I go back to if you give a mouse a cookie, and that's where we're situated. But look, how long is Starmer going to be there, right? The problem with Democratic elected leaders is that they're only there until their next election, and if you got to deal with the American president that you have, not necessarily the one that you want, right? I remember Obama's folks complaining to me back in the early teens that they thought the collection of European leaders was just weak, and that it was too bad he didn't have better counterparts to deal with. And it's just like, okay, and he didn't have, that Merkel was really the only world leader he truly thought was up to the task. So, I think there's always a little bit of that, but this is a Realpolitik, right? I think, isn't that what Kissinger called it?
Also remember that Starmer will go to have his election after Trump leaves office, unless, of course, he can somehow concoct a third term.
Unless he doesn't survive. I was just going to say, that's the problem with Starmer. With your system, there's always a piano hanging over the head of the PM, right? at any moment in time, the rope can get cut. Yeah.
Right. And if you give too much to Trump, that becomes your election campaign right there, which you might lose. To a guy called Nigel Farage, who'll say, well, we all want to be nice to Trump, but I'm the only one he actually listens to. I just want to ask you a question, Chuck. When it comes to what we have to offer as a country, we in Britain, is the best card that we can really play sleepovers at Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle? Is that as good as it gets? Let's be honest. We can take the brutal truth.
I think for Trump, that's all he cares about.
So we shouldn't confuse that with a respect for our system or our democracy.
I don't. I'd like to think not. I mean, I think we still count on the UK as sort of being, I think, our most important proxy in the European relationship, right? And if and again, I do think we all see it as, the UK is a sibling, the rest of Europe are friends. And in some ways, the UK is and vice versa, right? When the rest of the Europe gets frustrated, who do they turn to get the Americans' attention? You go to the UK.
Can I ask you just one other thing? And this is unrelated, but sort of not. The first thing that Trump will do after the state visit is go to Charlie Kirk's memorial. I think that's his big event of the weekend. Does the death of Charlie Kirk and the language that it has unleashed, is that a turning point for you in American politics?
Well, I will tell you this, that I've been, as somebody who's supposed to also write for a living, I'm always looking for hope in our current political situation. And it looks like Trump and his allies see a political opportunity to exploit rather than, he wants to bring everybody to heal. He is not interested in helping the country heal, if that makes sense. And I think he sees a political opportunity. And so it is going to get worse because we have seen when you radicalize your opponents. And right now, one extremist movement is only successful if they have another one out there as their counterpoint. And I really fear that what they're threatening right now, which is essentially they're threatening to the left what they claim the left was doing to the right, which is criminalizing speech, right? And cancel culture. And I don't know if the Democratic Party can speak with one voice to push back on this. I think the Republican critics of Trump all feel like they can't speak up. They've been silenced. So no, I think this could be a very dark turning point for us short term. I still have long-term optimism.
For a short term.
But I do think that I think the voters aren't going to tolerate this. But if but him going this direction of essentially going after folks and basically ignoring the extremists on his side and saying it's only a problem on the left, I do think that will wear thin with voters, but it may be ugly for the next year or two.
I was in Utah at Utah Valley University after the killing of Charlie Kirk, and there was a person standing there with a kind of Democrats killed Charlie Kirk sign, and we were listening to what Donald Trump said. Actually, Spencer Cox, the Republican governor, was saying stuff that I found really quite inspiring on how we try and bridge the divide right now. But there was a certain irony, and it's quite scary, to everything Donald Trump was saying, which was he was basically he was basically doing exactly what he was accusing others of, which was, saying that the left was responsible for this death. And we have a free speech issue that they are going to really try and exploit in the UK as well, despite the fact that you had, so many people marching in that far right march that Matt mentioned. I see what you're saying about it getting ugly over the next year. Where does your hope come from? What brings it back?
Look, I think we've got two huge problems. One is the tech companies, right? And the fact that we are not turning our attention to them, right? They have exploited this. They have created this information ecosystem that is designed to agitate, that is designed to create instability. I mean, it shouldn't be lost on any of us that before social media, the world was, it's not like we didn't have our share of mentally fragile people, but now we've got this social media ecosystem that we can prey upon them That's one. But, it is, I don't know if the Democratic Party is the ability to sort of, hey, we've got to take a step back here. Spencer Cox gives me a little bit of hope, but I don't know if either party has the credibility to heal. And so, if we don't have, if the president won't do it, there's nobody else that has the credibility to do it. It may take an outsider, it may take an independent candidacy, it may take a third party, but I think right now our two parties are broken. Our leadership structure is broken. Our incentive structures are broken. And this is why we're in the situation we're in.
I've got to say, Chuck, I mean, you were optimistic about 4 minutes ago or so.
I know. It's hard.
You've killed your own optimism.
It is, all I can say is eventually the voters get it right. And we've gone through bouts of violence in this country in the past. You guys have had your share of violence. It is democracy can be messy.
Chuck, it's been great talking to you. I promise you that when you come over to this side of the ocean, you won't get a royal visit. I don't have a royal carriage. I'm not going to put you up in Windsor
Castle. Do you know how exciting this is?
Really good.
I've waited my whole life.
Pub in Windsor, and I can give you a Scotch egg and a warm beer.
Well, I would like that, but I've waited my whole life. Being a Charles. I always, I had this. I was always sort of like, I hope he gets there, and I was for a long time thought, oh, there's never going to be a King Charles. I'm never going to be able to, as a Charles.
I prefer King Chuck. Chuck the Third.
I wish he went by Chuck. Does he have a nickname? Does he go by King Chuck?
Privately.
I really hope it is. I hope it's not King Chaz or King Charlie. I really hope it's King Chuck.
I'm sure he's got lots of nicknames, but I don't think Chuck is one of them. I hate to say it. Next week, the TrumpWorld caravan moves across the ocean again to New York for the United Nations General Assembly. It's the 80th session of that organization at a time when certainly the administration in Washington doesn't believe perhaps that it should even exist. Huge challenges, the recognition of Palestine by the UK, by France, and the general discussion about the state of the world disorder. Anushka will be there, and so will I, and hopefully so will you.
And we do want to hear from you. So if you've got any burning questions wherever you are across the Atlantic Ocean or anywhere in the world, do get in touch with us. You can email us at TrumpWorld@channel4.com, or you can leave messages on YouTube or Spotify, and we will try to get back to you.
Thanks for joining.